Hello, I'm Ben and I'm at it again. This is a DIY home front. Today I'm working on chairs, but the other day I was working on improving my Harbor Freight mini tire changer. So let's start that video up and show you what I did. Well, this is what I had purchased, the PITTSBURGH Mini-Tire Changer from Harbor Freight. And it worked really well, and I think it's going to be a nice addition to my tools as far as repairing lawnmowers go. But it had a few problems with the way the base was assembled, and I think I can improve on it. So let me show you the two things that I ended up doing to it. Now, after unboxing this and taking a look at the pieces, the first thing I realized is that the base looks like it needs to be mounted to something. It's got holes like you're going to bolt it to a table or a floor. I'm not sure which, but it definitely looks like it needs to be mounted to something. And the second thing is, it seems like there's just a lot of excessive play once you start to put these pieces together. Now, this is what the tire changer looks like now after I did my improvements, and if you want to see how I got to here, you're just going to have to watch the rest of this video. Well, thanks for checking out this video. If you're curious, I've got two other ones with this tire changer, a product review and where it fails. Well, this is me the first night that I used this tire changer, and I had 6 lawnmower tires that I was swapping around, and I've already done about 4 of them. And as I look at this, I realize, man, there's just a lot of play. I mean, I've got the base clamped down to the table, but still there's a lot of play where this aluminum piece fits down into, for lack of better words, like a trailer hitch receiver. So my first idea was to take some washers and put some washers in there and reduce the space, making it tighter inside of that receiver hitch. The problem is the washers don't want to stay where you put them. They keep sliding out of the way. What I really need is something that's going to hold that washer to the aluminum piece while I'm moving it around and inserting it into the base. The fastest solution would be to just use some electrical tape to hold the washers in place, even if it's just a proof of concept. At the moment, I've got 2 relatively large washers and I'm going to put one on each side of the aluminum piece and see how that does. Good, looks like I'm headed in the right direction, but those 2 washers with some electrical tape are just a little bit too wide for the mounting base. So I went and looked at all of my washers to see if I had some that were maybe just a little bit thinner to see if they would work. And then I realized that there were some burrs on the inside of the base. So I went and got a Dremel with a small sanding disc on it, and I cleaned up the inside of the base so that way I could slide the aluminum piece in with those washers on it. With all the metal burrs sanded off from the inside of the mounting base, I could easily slide in the aluminum piece with the 2 washers that I had put on it. So I went back to the first washers that were a little bit thicker because I want to have a snug fit. Well, it was snug and it took a few minutes, but eventually I was able to get the aluminum piece down and get one of those cotter pins through both of the washers, and that really took all the slop out of the base. Now, I still have the problem where it's clamped to the table. Right now, when you're yanking on the tire, you have enough leverage that it ends up pulling those clamps off. Alright, it's the next day, and I'm cutting a piece of oak plywood. And this plywood came from some deconstructed oak furniture, and it's just a scrap. But I'm going to cut it the same width as the picnic table. Well, that's perfect. I plan on using this table for this mini tire changer, and I can clamp this on each side and keep it in place. This is a piece of birch scrap plywood, and I'm going to cut it so that they're both the same width, and they'll both be 3/4 of an inch thick. I don't know about you guys, but if I can't find a home for my old furniture, a lot of times I just disassemble it and keep it for scraps. It always comes in handy when I need it. Now the goal is to get the tire changer and sandwich it between these 2 pieces of wood. And I'm going to do that by measuring it and centering it, and then I'll cut a notch out of this top piece of plywood, and I'll figure out how it's going to be held in place after I get the notch cut. I'm not sure how you guys are, but a lot of times when I'm doing projects, I don't sit down at a table and draw up extensive plans. I make it up as I go, and I solved the problems as they come. And the next thing I need to figure out is the metal plate going to be permanently in this wood, or am I going to be able to take it out? Because it sure would make it a lot easier to store this if the piece of wood was just flat. I could lay that on the shelf and put the tire changer on top of the plywood. I don't use this cordless jigsaw very often, but it's nice to have it, and when I do use it, it makes things a lot easier. Well, I wanted a snug fit because I'm trying to eliminate any of the wobble that's in this, but I think I made it a little too snug. I'm going to have to cut a little bit more off of this wood if I'm going to get it in there. Well, I didn't need to cut too much off of this piece of plywood, but now that I've got the notch a little bit bigger, I can easily fit the mounting plate for the tire changer in here. Probably the most logical thing to do would be to use my square and make sure I have it lined up exactly square, and then I can draw the outline of this plate, because I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a router and I'm going to cut this out so I can screw this top piece of plywood onto the bottom one and sandwich the mounting plate in between. Now that I've got the plywood marked, I'm going to go ahead and take the mounting plate and line it up against the bottom of my skill saw so I can adjust the blade to cut just as deep as the mounting plate. I'll take my saw and I'll go ahead and cut these lines that I had marked in the plywood. Then I can grab the router and I'll be able to take out all the excess wood to make room for the mounting plate. I have to really take my time and get the depth of the router adjusted just right, because once you start, these routers really do manage to take out a lot of material quick. I never talk about safety enough in my videos, but I hope you noticed that I didn't have the battery in the router when I was setting the depth. A router can really do a lot of damage to any flesh that it comes in contact with, so please be careful with the router, especially these battery operated ones. Well, the next thing I'm going to do is sand everything with 120 grit sandpaper. And I'm going to pay really close attention to where I'm planning on gluing these two pieces of wood together, because both of them are covered with polyurethane, and for wood glue to work effectively, it needs to be down to bare wood. So I'm going to do a lot of sanding on these before I do the gluing. Well, I'll make sure I've got this top piece of plywood in the center, and then I'm going to double check that mounting plate one last time. I spent a few minutes lining up and putting marks every place I wanted a screw to be, but you don't have to be that way if you don't want to. But what you do probably need to do is drill a hole for each one of those screws, because they're not going to be too long and you don't want the plywood to be separating. I turned the piece of plywood over and drilled through the other side too, just to make sure I had a good hole. I didn't want the screw grabbing on this piece of wood, I wanted the screw grabbing on the bottom piece of wood. Then I used a very liberal amount of glue because I knew I was going to really be tugging and pulling on this tire changer. I take my old toothbrushes and hang on to them, and I'm using one right now to spread this glue out to make sure I've got an even coat all over this piece of plywood. Well, I want to make sure all the screws are flush or below the surface of this piece of plywood, so I'm going to take a larger drill bit and countersink each hole. These are 1¼ drywall screws, and since our two pieces of plywood together should be 1½ inches, I should be able to screw these in, and if I sink them in a little bit, that'll be fine too. They shouldn't poke through the other side. Well, my tools did a little bit too good of a job, and as I checked the bottom, there's a couple screws that actually came through. So I've got a grinder and I'm going to grind them off because I don't want this piece of plywood scratching the surface I clamp it down to. Now, when I first tried using this, I clamped the base to a table, but I was getting so much leverage that the clamps couldn't hold it in place. But now that these clamps are going to be about 1 foot away from the bottom mount, I am sure that they are going to hold this tire changer in place. The last thing I think I might do is I might go ahead and lock it in place by just putting 2 locking screws in. Now, these screws would go in and out every time I use a tire changer, So they're not in there to hold anything down. They're just there to keep the tire changer from being able to slip out. Well, there you go. I don't think it was a waste of time. I'll be glad to use it, and we're going to use it in just a minute and see how it works with something other than a lawnmower tire. Well, the first thing I tried it out on was the tires on this John Deere tractor. And let me show you how it holds up when you're really yanking on something. These are for industrial tires. They really grip the bead, and I know the camera's focused on the tire, but I'm actually putting my entire body weight and hanging off of that arm trying to get the bead to break. Well, here I am trying to put a tire on the rim, and you can see I am turning this as hard as I can, and I'm putting my entire body weight into this, and I weigh 230 pounds. So the first improvement took the play out between the aluminum and that receiver hitch type mount, and this improvement gives me a temporary means to securely fasten this tire changer to the table. Well, you can see I still got some bald tires. I'm not sure if I'm going to change these out or not, but I'm glad I went through the trouble of improving that mini tire changer. Well, I hope that gives you some ideas on how you might be able to improve yours. Thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, leave me a comment, and check out my playlist, and I'll see you in whatever video comes next.